He kissed her on stage while the cameras flashed, but behind the smiles their marriage was quietly sliding apart, so quietly that most people only noticed when the pieces began to fall into view and the fallout became impossible to ignore. If you want real-time updates as this story develops, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. We'll be tracking the details, the reactions, and what this means for both lives as they try to rebuild. They did not wake up one morning and decide to divorce. The breakdown was small and steady, missed conversations that accumulated into distance, domestic rhythms that no longer matched, and private resentments that did not get aired until they hardened into permanent grooves. At first there were work pressures and schedule conflicts that anyone in ministry might recognize, late-night planning, travel, and the never-ending demand to publicly perform stability and faith. Over time those pressures intersected with unresolved differences about leadership, influence, and what it meant to be a partner in public ministry, and between the two of them a slow emotional drift developed. That kind of drift is dangerous because it is invisible in daylight. On camera they remained poised, dependable, and in many eyes exemplary. Off camera, though, the small daily neglects, skipped dinners, cancelled prayers together, and the sense that one person's priorities had quietly taken precedence, stacked up until the relationship's foundation began to showing hairline cracks. For years they operated on different internal clocks. One partner felt called to care for the household and provide a stable, intimate refuge. The other felt called to lead, to renew, and to step into public roles that required constant engagement with audiences, donors, and church leaders. Those callings are not, of course, inherently incompatible. But when both partners believe the other is losing sight of the promises they once made, resentment follows. The emotional distance wasn't dramatic, it was the sort of erosion that takes place when two people stop doing the tiny, ordinary things that mean, "I see you." A slow pattern of misattunement, where one partner's anxiety about a ministry decision met the other's quiet withdrawal, meant conversations that might have saved them became avoided. Each small avoidance was a missed opportunity to repair. Over months and years these minor rifts became major ones. The result, intimacy thinned, trust quietly frayed, and the couple found themselves in a marriage defined by parallel lives rather than a shared journey. That parallel life was amplified by public appearances that kept the optics of unity intact even as their private reality diverged. Onstage they were a team, eloquent, polished, and the image of a ministry marriage. Offstage, the world looked very different. This gap between public persona and private experience is a particular strain when your livelihood, reputation, and social network are built around being a model of faith and family cohesion. There is a tremendous pressure to keep up the brand even when the relationship behind it is struggling. The irony here is painful. A public image designed to inspire strength and hope can become a straitjacket, forcing partners to perform connection for audiences who believe that the cameras reveal the whole truth. The collision between ministry expectations and private needs intensified the strain. Leadership roles in high-profile ministries bring a constant outflow of demands, fundraising, speaking engagements, counsel seekers, and the moral weight of representing a faith community. For Joni, whose life and identity have been bound to public ministry for decades, those pressures were not new. For Doug, who came into the picture later and carried his own expectations about partnership and leadership, reconciling his desire for a meaningful, private marriage with the realities of a public life proved difficult. Where Joni's ministry calendar demanded visibility and a degree of self-sacrifice to the organization's needs, Doug's leadership expectations included shared decision-making and a sense of mutual stewardship. When those expectations were not balanced, friction developed. Underneath the smiles, both partners felt misunderstood. One accused the other of being absent, the other felt criticized for how he navigated ministry life. Personal histories also shaped the couple's dynamic. Everyone brings emotional legacies to marriage, patterns learned from family of origin, past hurts, and coping strategies that can either help or hinder a partnership. When personal histories conflict rather than complement, the result is often a mismatch in rhythm and resilience. If one partner is inclined to process conflict publicly, through conversation and community, while the other withdraws or insists on private resolution, repeated misunderstandings ensue. Over time, those small misalignments build a narrative in each partner's mind about the other's priorities and values. Without honest, vulnerable conversation to correct those narratives, assumptions harden into resentments and the marriage slides toward a public rupture. Communication breakdowns were central to the unraveling. Many marriages survive stress, but very few survive chronic miscommunication and unspoken expectations. In this case, the couple repeatedly avoided difficult conversations or approached them defensively. What might have been moments of repair, admissions of hurt, requests for small behavioral adjustments, or shared boundaries about travel and public appearances, turned into standoffs or quiet acquiescence. They fell into well-worn grooves of defensiveness and avoidance. One partner's attempt to raise a concern was met with a counter-accusation, a plea for more emotional presence met with a dismissal about the burden of ministry. That pattern sapped energy and goodwill long before any legal papers were filed. Add family dynamics to the pressure cooker and the stress escalates dramatically. Both partners were not just a couple, they were embedded in extended family networks that carried expectations, loyalties, and histories of their own. Family members often drift into the arena in ways that help or harm, well-intentioned advice, subtle pressure to conform, loyalty tests that feel like judgments, or, in some cases, taking sides. Family members' reactions, ranging from sympathy to critique, from public support to behind-the-scenes maneuvering, amplified the couple's isolation. When your marriage is a public institution as well as a private relationship, relatives' involvement often becomes part of the story. Those family dynamics can either provide needed support or inflame the very divisions they were meant to soothe. Private conversations that should have been moments of intimacy instead became sources of anxiety. Sensitive topics, finances, public perception, parenting, boundaries with staff, and the role of spiritual counsel were frequently handled in ways that left both partners feeling exposed or unheard. When you avoid vulnerability, anxiety grows. Each avoided conversation becomes a pile of unspoken grievances, and the emotional distance only multiplies. Instead of partnership, both felt alone in the battle. Instead of creative problem-solving, the relationship defaulted to blame. That is a heavy burden for any couple, particularly those under the media's eye. Public scrutiny magnified every flaw. In ordinary marriages, the private mistakes sometimes stay private. For public figures, that rarely happens. Once the disagreement became visible, through rumors, social media chatter, or the occasional unstaged misstep, the public began to parse every moment for signs of rupture. Fans and critics both jumped in, some offered sympathy and counsel, others judgment and gossip. Social media is a magnifying glass and an amplifier. It turns solitary struggles into public spectacles. That pressure imposes a double standard. The couple must not only navigate their own pain but also manage the narratives that strangers construct about their motives and moral character. Even well-meaning public attention adds strain because every conversation and decision risks being misinterpreted and amplified. The divorce damaged reputations on both sides. In communities where faith and leadership overlap, public credibility is currency. What had once been a platform for influence and pastoral care now triggered skepticism and, for some, disillusionment. Supporters questioned motives, critics searched for reasons to vindicate their cynicism. When a marriage ends under public scrutiny, the fallout is not only emotional but reputational. Donors reconsider giving, partners distance themselves, and congregants look for ethical clarity. The damage was not uniform. Some remained loyal, some withdrew support, but the net result was a reputational hit that both partners had to reckon with while processing personal grief. Looking ahead, both face uncertain futures. Rebuilding after a public divorce is neither quick nor straightforward. Healing requires honest work, therapy, recalibrated priorities, and recommitment to practices that foster trust. For leaders who must also steward public responsibilities, the path toward restoration requires humility, acknowledging mistakes, accepting accountability where needed, and communicating with clarity about changes made to avoid repeating the past. Reputational repair is possible but demands time and consistent action that demonstrates growth, not merely words. From their experience come a few takeaways that are relevant whether you're in ministry, leadership, or any long-term relationship. First, slow emotional drift can be more devastating than a single dramatic betrayal. The day-to-day neglects are the real erosive force. Staying connected in small ways matters. Second, mismatched expectations about leadership, time, or family role, will quietly erode intimacy unless they are surfaced and negotiated. Third, if your life is public, the pressure you feel is real. Public roles magnify private struggles and require proactive boundary setting and external accountability. Fourth, avoiding difficult conversations only compounds the problem. Vulnerability is hard but necessary. Finally, quick fixes are not a substitute for sustained healing. Rebuilding trust requires time, honest work, and visible changes that demonstrate new habits. The story is not a simple morality play. It involves grieving people who made choices under pressure, decisions that harmed others, and long-term habits that required repair. There are no easy villains here, only human beings whose public roles complicated the private work they needed to do. The broader lesson for anyone watching is this: public ministry and private marriage must be intentionally protected by both structural safeguards and the daily practices of attention and honesty. When those protections are absent, the inevitable result is pain. In the end, the collapse of this marriage should be read as a cautionary tale about the cost of quiet neglect, misalignment, and the corrosive effect of performing unity when intimacy is fraying. If there is hope to be found, it lies in the work that follows: honest reckoning, therapy, time to grieve and to grow, and a renewed commitment to place people and truth above image. The rest is ordinary human work: listening, apologizing when necessary, setting boundaries, and learning to be present again. That is the hard but necessary work of healing after a very public heartbreak.